Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so in just a few hours from now, season 8 of Battlegrounds is about to begin. And this video we are going to be talking specifically about victory track meta. And to be honest, it is kind of similar situation to the previous season where you can largely use most or almost any of your champions. Now, obviously, science class will be suffering the most from the masochism over time in general, but given the fact that masochism over time is pretty much the only node that you really need to worry about, and then picture of health just means that you will not be able to stop um, regen with petrifies and poisons and debuffs in general, and that masochism will matter slightly more. It's just kind of like basically a side effect, I would say, and then the dauntless node obviously gives benefit to the strikers. So, in its essence, we're just gonna have a masochism meta. In this case, masochism over time. And it's kind of empty. Any champion that you like, you can use if you really want, aside from a handful of like science champions, I would say. And that is due to the fact that masochism is only 5%, which means in vast majority of the cases, you will be simply able to out damage it. Now, if we would be talking about later circuit, the meta is much more complex because there we have 15% masochism, which you would not be able to damage in addition to the bleed. So what are going to be the best ways to deal with masochism? Obviously, the best way is do not trigger it at all. Basically, do not parry. Block bait opponent's heavy attacks if you have a tanky champion, or intercept if you can rely on intercept. And then it's a vanilla fight. If you treat every fight as basically stun immune and use champions that do not inflict debuffs. However, there are obviously additional means available, and in this case, it's primarily going to be staggers and nullify effects and neutralize. So, mystics are gonna get a leg up in this meta in particular because every time you do trigger this masochism over time, you also every time have a buff that you can nullify and then feed your mystic dispersion and then be more aggressive. And so all that being said, other than that, you will probably just use champions that out damage it. Also, so far, whenever we have had masochism meta, I believe twice in past, we never had masochism over time, but virtually the same thing. Most people choose to run recoil. And that's because your defender's liquid courage and double edge debuffs will automatically get purified. So you do not need to worry about those damage over time effects over there. Masochism itself heals your defenders up. So even recoil isn't as big of a drawback. And then offensively, obviously, if you use liquid courage double edge recoil compatible champions, it is going to be much easier time to out damage masochism, and with that, finish the fights quicker and use more different champions because you'll basically be pretending it doesn't. So I do highly suspect that majority of the people will be running liquid courage double edge at the start of this victory track meta, and I myself will be building deck around liquid courage double edge as well to start off. Now, I'm not going to say that it will be a must-have. I'm sure that you will be able to remain relatively competitive without it, but I do ultimately think that it will be the best strategy. So looking at champions, which will be the MVPs, again, it's largely just your top champions in general. Like Cosmic class, Galen is still going to be an absolute monster. No problems for him at all. Obviously, Hercules still can be perfectly usable on offense and defense. DGR is just going to basically ignore the masochism altogether, and you're going to be easily able to outdamage champions with that. Hulkling doesn't inflict debuffs, can find openings through block. Pretty much perfect for masochism. Going on to Mystic class, I think Juggernaut is going to be an absolute monster because you are unstoppable. You can gain easy openings playing around that unstoppable, and even if you do trigger masochism, it's just going to feed your Mystic Dispersion. You can nullify it, so you don't need to suffer the full attack health penalty, basically, that you would gain. And yeah, Juggernaut's pretty much going to be perfect for the victory track. Absorbing Man as well, because giving opponent a buff in every fight will give you Mystic Dispersion, thus help you maintain your forms easier. Also, every time that regen will expire, you will get your forms paused, so Absorbing Man will be easier to use offensively for sure. Black Widow Clairvoyant, especially if you use Recoil, absolutely no reason not to run her. America Chavez does not have to inflict a single debuff in the fight if she doesn't want to. Her heavy stun is passive. Dr. Doom, just nullify everything and, feed the cycle even quicker. Mystics in general at large, I could keep listing, but any of your high-ranked Mystics will likely do very, very well if you're running Mystic Dispersion. So Rintra, Neutralize will stop that because that's a buff. Same thing with Tigra, same thing with Wiccan. I do think that Spider-Man Supreme is going to be a very great champion for this meta altogether, because with Masochism active, it will be harder to fight against him because, there's going to be the reparries and you're going to have to deal with that. So I think Mystic Spidey is going to be quite solid. In Mutant class, we obviously have Archangel, shut down healing altogether. Domino, absolutely no reason why not. Omega Red, and Kitty Pryde. Now, I'm not super sure how well Bishop and Havoc will do, but, it should be fine, because especially in case of Havoc, I think he'd outdamage it as well, perhaps with Bishop too, but yeah, Kitty Pryde for sure. Tech class, Ghost, absolutely no need for debuffs. Synergize perfectly well with Liquid Courage Double Edge. Warlock, Infection, permanent heal block. Penny Parker, again, very solid heal block in aggressive fights, no reason not. Nimrod, again, he does benefit whenever opponents gain regen because you can ramp up faster. So Nimrod's going to be even more dangerous in an average fight than he normally is, because every champion will be triggering some of these regens, and he can simply nullify them, replace them with shock. Kate Bishop, even though she does inflict debuffs on her heavy attack, the coolest thing is that her cryo arrow is passive cold snap, so you don't need time or worry with Kate Bishop. For that, Kingpin, obviously you can completely avoid throwing your level 1s. If you want to, just go for level 2s, and then you have unstoppable, easy openings too. Why not? Massacre, damage output should be more than enough to outdamage the Masochism and still be an absolute nuke. Nick Fury will obviously, as always, be kind of like viable dual-purpose champion. Valkyrie, again, absolutely no reason not to use her. Doesn't rely on debuffs at all. She'll be a beast. Science class is the most affected, I would say. If I take a look at science champions, then there are a bunch of science champions that you would find significantly more difficult to use, or they would be significantly slower, like Mr. Fantastic, so on and so forth. However, there are several science champions that will function very well. I do believe that Spot will do just fine, because he typically has more than enough damage, just nuke opponent down in like one massive level 2. And that Masochism shouldn't matter too much. Human Torch, obviously, you cannot reverse the healing because opponents immune to regen modification, but with your Nova Flames, you should have more than enough damage to just basically do what Human Torch always does. Scorpion should work perfectly fine. He's going to work around Masochism excellently because you will consistently be inflicting your poison debuffs on the opponent and dealing significant enough burst of damage. So I think Scorpion should be functioning basically fine, maybe a tiny bit slower. And Hulk. And Hulk has basically similar story, in my opinion, as to Massacre, where you are going to be triggering Masochism all the time once you enter your damage phase, and you still have a ton of damage to finish off the fight. So I do think Hulk will function just fine. I'm not saying other science champions will not work, but the biggest thing to worry about Masochism is when you refresh debuffs, and that is something that's quite a big problem with a ton of science champions. For instance, or when you reapply debuffs more specifically. For instance, champions like Spider Ham and Cassie Lang, both will struggle a lot, because when opponent throws special attack, all of those power slings are consumed. But then, if Masochism is not on cooldown, they would be reapplied. However, Masochism shrugs all of them off immediately. So something like Mr. Fantastic, Spider Ham, Cassie Lang, are definitely in the way of champions I would personally avoid. That I will personally avoid because I do not think they will function well enough. But that's pretty much it. Other than that, let me know what you guys think. This is looking like another one of those very straightforward metas. As I said, if it would be Gladiator Circuit Week 1, that looks much more complex, something that I would enjoy much more. But I understand, why they are making these victory track metas significantly easier than the Gladiator Circuit ones. I just wish they would make them a tiny bit tougher. Because, again, in these victory track metas, you can virtually use all your champions. Be more or less fine. And, yeah. Let me know what you guys think in general. Again, so my personal predictions are majority of the top end players will be running Liquid Courage Double Edge for this meta because Mazgim greatly has worked in past for recall setups. And yeah, with 5% Mazghism and no other nodes really there, people are just going to choose to damage it. So, is what it is. Let me know. And I'm going to catch you guys soon. Bye. Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about